How often should you change the oil in your engine? Some people say it's okay to leave it 24,000 miles or 2 years. Even some manufacturers have these long service life schedules that recommend oil changes in terms of years rather than months. And other people insist that you should change the oil every 6 months or every 5,000 miles. So in this video, we're just going to look at the question of how often should you change your oil. We're going to look at what happens to oil as it ages, how it degrades, the problems that you get when you don't change the oil frequently enough, and also a foolproof way of knowing for your own specific engine and your own car when you should change the oil. What is the optimum time or the optimum amount of miles to actually change it? So please let me know in the comments what your thoughts are in this debate. When do you as a car owner decide to change your oil? Do you do it yourself? Do you get a garage to do it? Is it something you carry out every 6 months? Have you got a set mileage you aim for? Or do you just go along with whatever the manufacturer's recommendations are in the service schedule? So what does oil do? We've got other videos that go into oil in a lot more detail than this. So literally we're just going to skim the surface and explain that the oil is a surface or a barrier on the metal and it prevents friction. So with two surfaces of metal rubbing against each other, you will get friction that will manifest itself as heat and also wear and tear on each of those components. So the oil forms really a sacrificial layer between those two rubbing surfaces and helps them to move over each other more freely and reduces the amount of wear and tear that actually happens when those components are rubbing together. So does oil degrade? Well, yes, it does. Like anything really, it will degrade over time. If you've ever left a bottle of wine open, you'll know that the oxygen has a reaction with the wine itself, turning it into a very bitter vinegar. So engine oil also has a reaction that happens with oxygen. This oxidization process reduces the efficiency of the oil and it reduces the characteristics and the flow of the oil and the amount of protection you get from it in your engine. So even if you don't drive your car, there is an amount of time that the oil is good generally inside the engine. Although it's sealed, it's still exposed to oxygen. So there's still this oxidization process going on with the oil itself. Now, inside the internal combustion engine, you're obviously burning things. You're burning the fuel. The byproducts of that, the blow-by gases that come past the pistons, enter the oil and add to contaminants within the oil. So you've got various acids, various moistures. Even fuel and coolant can in some cases seep through the structure of the engine and be carried in the oil. So all of those things are degrading the quality of the oil. It's becoming diluted. It's becoming less effective at reducing friction within the engine. So in real terms, this is changing the properties of the oil. It maybe doesn't stick to the metal surfaces long enough. Maybe the moisture content evaporates off, exposing metal surfaces, so there's no longer any oil barrier between it. So the catastrophic effect really is the additional wear and tear that you have on your engine. So how do you know when the optimum time is to change your oil? Well, a little fact, if you were sanding a piece of wood, you would notice tiny little bits of sawdust coming off, and the amount of sawdust will really tell you how effective that sanding process has been. And it is very, very similar inside the engine. If you've got wear and tear going on, tiny metal particles are going to be breaking off from the metal surfaces as they rub against each other and contaminating the oil. So that's also another problem you get, because these metal particles inside the oil will be adding to the wear and tear or the abrasion inside the engine. It's fair to say that the oil filter itself will catch the larger particles, but we're talking about very tiny microscopic particles, and these particles flowing around the oil are really what you should be looking at when you get the oil analyzed. So when you send your oil off to a lab, they will analyze it carefully and give you a report back as to what it contains. By paying careful attention to the metal content of the oil will tell you how much wear and tear you get. So when I've done this on previous cars, if I've left the oil change in terms of 24,000 miles as the manufacturer recommends, or 12,000 miles, you will notice there is a lot more metal particles in the oil. So that would indicate that you should shorten the oil change schedule. You're not getting the protection. And the crazy thing is here that the oil, as it degrades, will become less and less effective. So the wear and tear is going to accelerate and get worse and worse. So the longer you leave it, the more the engine will degrade. And an old worn engine degrades much more quickly than a clean, efficient engine. In a worn engine, you get problems with those blow-by gases where things don't quite meet as tightly as they were originally manufactured. Please let me know in the comments if you've ever had your oil tested and what the results were, and if it changed your opinion as to how often the oil should be changed. So when you send the oil off for analysis after, say, 8,000 miles, you'll notice the metal particles in the oil is much reduced. But going to excessive levels like 5,000 miles or 4,000 miles or 3 months or just a few weeks on the oil change, you're not getting much of a benefit over that optimum, say, 8,000 mile mark. So when you send it off, take a recommendation from them as to how often you should change the oil, and analyze the oil again at that point and see if the degradation of the oil has improved over that period of time. Now, it is going to be different for every single engine out there. I noticed that diesel cars with DPF filters, they run heat regeneration cycle. There's a lot of extra stress that is taken up by the oil in those. And also cars with turbochargers, the turbo itself is getting very hot. The oil can become very sludgy. And it really is vital that you adhere to the specifications and recommendations that manufacturers make, because that helps to protect the oil from this degradation that happens over time just due to the way the engine works. So pay careful attention to the manufacturer's recommendations with the oil grade. It's usually always advisable to reduce the service schedule in a car. Most people that watch this channel have done some kind of mod or upgrade to their engine, so it will certainly pay to get those oil changes accelerated and do that more frequently than the manufacturer recommends. Now, when you start stripping engines down, if they've had regular oil changes, you will notice there is very little wear and tear that happens on them. I've got a friend with an Audi S6, and that's just clocked up nearly 300,000 miles, and he's had no significant rebuilding work, no significant wear and tear on the engine. And when you measure the compression ratio, he gets really good compression in all the cylinders despite the mammoth mileage. You compare that with a car that's been neglected. Maybe they've not serviced it as often. Maybe they've even reasoned that because they don't drive the car much, they don't need to get the oil changed as much. And you will notice there's a lot more wear and tear on the engine. Again, a compression test on those engines will reveal that most cylinder compression is substantially down on the manufacturer's standard tolerances that they recommend. What's my recommendation at the end of this video? Well, for most drivers, I would recommend that you change the oil every 6 months, every 8,000 miles, whichever comes soonest. It's not whichever comes later. So the amount of miles you do, the amount of driving you do, and the type of engine will have a bearing on it. But the only real way of knowing for sure is to get your oil analysed. Now, the cost of analysis is usually equal to around the cost of the oil itself. But in long term, it's going to be an investment. You're going to understand your engine better, and you're going to be able to make better servicing decisions that are unique to your engine, your driving style, and how you actually use your car. So I hope this video has been useful to you. Please boop that like button, because that really does help us to get out there. Let us know in the comments what your experiences have been with oils. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so, because we would love you to stay tuned. And I've lined this interesting video up for you, and this playlist will also be of interest to you if you want to get the best from your car. Thank you for watching.